Kindergarten through second grade, interpreting student work. This portion of the Engage section focuses on 4 different tasks in different grade level bands and in different content areas. It also features a group of teachers using the standards level descriptors to interpret student work. This section builds on the work done by teachers in the previous modules who identified the task demands and the relevant ELP standards. This video features an integrated first grade science and English language development lesson. It is particularly helpful for teachers serving students in the early elementary grades or any educator seeking more models of how to interpret student work using the level descriptors. The purpose of this integrated lesson is for pairs of first grade students to engage in constructive conversations about predicted animal adaptations. Leading up to this lesson, the class had been engrossed in a unit of study about animal adaptations for nearly 2 weeks and had previously read a portion of the featured text, "What Do You Do When Something Wants to Eat You?" by Steve Jenkins. The 2 learning goals for this lesson are that students understand how different animal adaptations help animals to survive, and that students understand that constructive conversations involve responding to a partner's ideas and jointly creating ideas together. The specific conversation prompt that is given to students before they engage in partner conversation is, how do you think this pufferfish will defend itself? Come up with an idea together with your partner. Here is the student work, which can be downloaded in the resources section. In the next few minutes, you'll watch a group of educators from Iowa, Brenda Daisy, Natalie French, Joby Lawrence, and Shaylee Santiago, collaboratively interpreting the student work using the standards level descriptors. Their discussion is included to provide you with a model of a professional learning community working together through the process of using the level descriptors to examine student work. At this point, we strongly encourage you to pause the video and download a copy of the Guide for Interpreting Student Work from the Resources section, if you have not already done so. Throughout their discussion, the educators will be referencing this guide, so you may find it difficult to follow along without it in front of you. You may also find it useful to download the expert analysis that identifies the relevant ELP standards from the previous module, as well as a copy of the level descriptors to refer to as teachers mention them during the video.
All right, we're meeting today to use standards performance level descriptors to interpret student work samples. The task that we're going to be looking at is a task about animal adaptations. It's for first grade. They are reading the text, "What Do You Do When Something Wants to Eat You?" by Steve Jenkins. And the task asks students to make a prediction about how the pufferfish will defend itself and to work together with a partner to come up with one idea. So our goals are to interpret the student work using the performance level descriptors along 3 steps. In step 1, we will examine the ELP standards and corresponding standards PLDs. Those standards have been identified by previous panelists, and previous panelists identified standards 1, 2, and 8. Let's begin by looking at student sample 2 transcript. The first thing I think we want to do is figure out if the previous panelists' standards choices that they've identified were right on, or if our actual student work maybe suggests a different standard.
You had mentioned that they had identified standards 1, 2, and 8 as key ones to assess, and I think it's clear that standard 1 is essential to this task in order to construct meaning from what they've heard in reading the story and in their conversation with their partner. But I think standard 2 might be a better one looking at this task.
I agree, because it talks about students needing to participate in exchanges of information, and it's a primary emphasis of the lesson. And I think in this case, when you look at the transcribed conversation, you definitely have 2 students that are exchanging information and trying to make a collective decision.
And for me, standard 8 about the meaning of words and phrases, it will just help inform those other 2 standards. So that's not the big part of what I want to focus on, but I think that can help us help inform what we say about how they performed on standards 1 and 2.
So it sounds like standard 2 would be where we would want to focus our analysis. Okay? Let's look at step 2. What performance levels then do we see as we look at the level descriptors from level 1 to level 5 would most accurately describe our student work?
I see the students responding in the student work and prompting one another. For example, in number 1, student A is saying, okay, your turn, and student B responds and student A is prompting back with and, asking for more information. So looking at the PLDs, I'm looking right now at a level 2, going to a level 3 where they're taking turns and responding. More in a level 3, asking and answering simple questions. Student A says, why do you think that? And student B is again responding.
I think one thing that pushes it over a little for me is level 3 PLDs refer to the familiar topics. And I don't think this would have been a familiar topic if they hadn't already had a whole unit of study around it. So down at the bottom of level 4, about a variety of topics and texts. And so I think there is some emphasis back on the text, but predator being one word that I see that I am guessing they probably didn't know before they were exposed to the book that they read and the discussion they had in class.
There are 2 students going back and forth, and I'm not sure that they're both at the same level of performance. So when I look at the conversation, student A and student B, I think student B is it's performing a little bit higher than student A. So I really think if you look at the conversation and the output of student A and student B, I would be more willing to say student B is at level 4, but student A I'd say is probably still closer to like the level 3, just based on some of the different sort of flow of communication, and also I think the number of times they have to stop and start with trying to find some of the words to be able to finish a sentence.
I would agree with you. There's a lot of fillers in what student A is saying, and they're able to ask the questions to kind of drive the conversation, but they're not contributing as much of the content to the discussion of it.
How much of that is that A feels like he's like in charge of the task and trying to draw a partner in? I wasn't sure if maybe he's trying to get the other, but I mean, he does say, and it's going to, it's going, so he has a hard time expressing his thoughts. So he just says, your turn, like, that's all I have, you talk now.
And it may be that on a different task, on this task, A is showing evidence of level 3, but on a different task, A is higher, so we would want to continue, keep that in mind.
And I think, again, we're always looking at performance levels on a specific task. We're not making a determination about a student's proficiency level. We're talking about how they're performing on this task and isolating it to this task. And so that's why I'd be more comfortable in actually describing each student with a separate performance level descriptor.
So now that we've arrived at that, let's look at step 3. What kind of instructional supports could we use to improve student learning? What might some strategies be that we might be able to use?
Well, the first one that comes to my mind is
Just conversation skills.
constructive conversation skills, Matt, and the 4 different parts of that. They obviously have some of the turn-taking going on and building on each other's ideas. A little bit, B, down at number 6, B gives an answer, and student A says, why do you think that? And prompting for a little more information, more specificity or examples.
Okay, great. So just to summarize some of the key points, we've decided that standard 2 still seems like the most applicable standard. We've noticed students even though they were interacting together, we see 2 different performance levels, one at about a level 3 for this particular task and one at a level 4. We are analyzing only this task, this one moment in time, and using that to inform our strategies, and we think that constructive conversation skills from the Zweers Texter website would be an effective strategy that we could use to help move these students forward. And we were also reminded that oral language examples are just one instance, one moment in time of one student interacting with another student. And the EL proficiency level, or sorry, performance level may change depending on the task. Also, I think that we can see here the PLDs are descriptive. They're not necessarily prescriptive. So by looking at this, we've had a better idea of where we can focus our next steps. Covered one student sample. We've got a second student sample to look at now. We're looking at the video transcript that says day 1 student samples. Let's go back through that 3-step process. Step 1 says to examine the identified ELP standards and corresponding standards PLDs. Again, previous panelists have noted standards 1, 2, and 8 implicit in this task. As we look at this example of student work, do we feel that that's consistent?
There's definitely a standard 2. I think it's still a good match. There's that interaction, response back and forth from each other, and we have more turn taking in this student sample than we did in the previous one. We do get into a little bit more of some of the reasoning behind it, and so I was thinking standard 4 when I looked at this example. So that's not one of the primary ones that they identified, but just in the student work that we've got here, I think that could be relevant as well.
I would agree with you. I definitely see students expressing an opinion and giving support for that within their conversation.
I guess at this point, an instructional decision would have to be made on where to intervene. And if we were going to use standard 2 or standard 4, what would be the benefits with sticking with that standard 2? Or would it be okay to move away and go into standard 4? What would help move the student forward, and how would we make that decision?
I think a lot of it comes back to what you might have already covered in class or not. If you've already done a lot of work around standard 4, maybe you don't need to continue on that. Maybe you feel like you've taught the students to a point where they're proficient enough with it. So not knowing exactly what all has been covered up to this point, it's a little hard to say which way to go. If you hadn't, then maybe it makes sense to spend more time looking at standard 4.
I would say since we've already looked at standard 2, it might be nice to look at standard 4, just to kind of take a different look at it, have maybe a more broad conversation.
Okay. So at this point, we'll interpret the student work using the standard 4 performance level descriptors.
So when I'm looking at standard 4, there's not a lot of difference between a level 3 performance and a level 4 performance. The only difference I see on the chart is the context. So for level 4, about a variety of text, topics, experiences, and events. And knowing that this is something that they've studied from the book they read and the science lesson they had, I'd say it falls into the context of level 4 anyway. And then if we go to 5, the difference is about introducing the topic and providing a sense of closure. That's where, to me, we can really see, I don't feel like either student quite gets to number 5 unless, I guess at the very end, BR says under 137, we made one idea. BL, yeah. BR, okay, serious, bye. So bye has some element of closure, but that's not how you would expect an academic task to end. Now these are first graders, so.
Taking it in the context that this is a topic they've studied and seeing that they express the opinion, how does he swim so fast? And then they're giving reasons, maybe the fins, they're flapping really quickly. Knowing that it's an experience or topic that they've begun to learn about, but not necessarily a familiar one, I would place them at a 4.
One thing that struck me when I was looking through this work sample is that there's not the perfect flow, and that's how conversations are. Even us talking today, I find myself stumbling a little bit, right? But BR around the 1 minute, I feel like so he's trying to get his idea out, and if you got hung up on that, you might think he wasn't performing as high of a level. But then when you look at what he's saying, we can make one idea together. The pufferfish got big, other fish won't be able to eat them, he'll scratch himself, and so he's got some really great ideas there once he finally gets the thoughts flowing out. He's able to have some substantive content in what he's saying. So I guess my point is, I feel like sometimes we get caught up in the stumbling or the and what doesn't feel so fluent. But if you focus on the content of what he's saying, you can see he's actually performing at a pretty high level here.
It's a good reminder, even when we're focusing on a function-related standard like Standard 4, we notice the form because it's so natural to us. So it's a good reminder to keep, if what we're assessing is the function, to make sure that we're staying true to that. Any other thoughts on where the student sample is falling along the PLDs?
Do you notice a difference in PLDs between the two students like we did on the first student example?
That didn't jump out at me on this sample, and I don't know if it's just because of the way the conversation's flowing between these two students.
At first, I thought maybe VR was at a little bit higher level, but it's really the two of them kind of reaching a consensus and being able to express the opinion and support it.
So they seem to have some of those interactive skills that were referred to in Standard 2.
Right.
So it might be that a helpful instructional choice would be then, we're sort of getting some confirmation or evidence that Standard 4 is maybe where we can make a difference. So then if we want to move the students forward along that continuum of the PLDs, what kinds of strategies could we use?
If we're talking about reasons being a big part, and the evidence to support, I wonder if they had done some work where they jotted down some ideas of what some of the different reasons were. So did they already make notes about it? Did they do some sort of brainstorming so that they had those ideas in mind and it was easier then for those to come out in the conversation? And
Like maybe using some sort of an anticipatory guide to help them organize their thoughts so that when they were ready for a conversation, that they already had some things that they could key in on.
And extending it then to go back to the text or another text to actually look for reasons or textual evidence to support their opinions.
And don't you still think that the constructive conversation skills would be helpful to continue to scaffold them?
Yeah.
Because they did a nice job of going back and forth, but I still think they can benefit from additional scaffold support.
Absolutely. So it seems like we've chosen to focus this time on Standard 4. We've identified performance level 4 within Standard 4, and we've talked about some strategies that we could use to further support the students, including an extended anticipatory guide, as well as, that's if we're focusing on Standard 4, as well as the constructive conversation skills to continue to work on Standard 2.